The first time Amelia Nelson heard her husband say her name, after 3 long years of silence, it wasn't in the soft tone of a lover. It was a command. Amelia, the sound cut through the stillness of the Manhattan penthouse like a blade through glass. She froze halfway to the kitchen door, coffee mug trembling in her hand. For a second she thought she'd imagined it like she had so many times before. But when she turned, Gary Hernandez was there standing at the bottom of the grand staircase. Dark suit, pressed silver cufflinks gleaming every inch, the billionaire CEO, the tabloids called the King of Code. And for the first time in 3 years, his storm gray eyes were on her. "Yes," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Gary looked at her as if she were a stranger intruding on his morning routine. In a way she was. They had lived in the same house, slept in the same legal marriage, but occupied separate worlds. His empire stretched across Silicon Valley and Wall Street, an empire of algorithms, mergers, and power. Hers was the quiet kitchen at dawn, the coffee pot, the ticking clock, and the ache of being unseen. 3 years of marriage without a touch, without a word that wasn't about schedules or appearances, without a heartbeat that belonged to anything but duty. Gary's jaw flexed, his tone even and detached. "Do you have something suitable to wear for a corporate gala tomorrow evening?" The question was absurd enough to make Amelia blink. "I'm sorry." He exhaled sharply, the kind of sigh that carried both impatience and indifference. "A dress, Amelia. Something appropriate to accompany the CEO of Hernandez Tech to the Global Innovators Gala." Amelia stared at him. The billionaire who had treated her like a ghost suddenly wanted her to stand beside him in public. For what? A stunt, a show, or another business deal? Her voice trembled, though not from fear. "You've never taken me anywhere before." "Business reasons," he said flatly. "The board expects a stable family image. You're my wife on paper at least. It's time you act like it." The words landed like ice shards. On paper. As if her life, her vows, her humiliation could be filed under corporate image. She clenched her hands until her nails bit into her palms. "And if I say no?" Gary's eyes flickered just for a heartbeat. Something human broke through the mask. "That's not an option." Her chest burned, but her voice came out steady. "Everything with you is an obligation, isn't it, Gary? Even breathing must have a quarterly report." For a fleeting moment, regret shadowed his face. It was gone in a blink. "This event is important," he said coldly. "Investors from Tokyo, Zurich, and DC will be there. I can't afford distractions." "Distractions?" She repeated the word, tasting bitter. "You mean me?" He didn't answer. Amelia lifted her chin, the quiet dignity of her mother's teachings grounding her. "I'll go. But not because it's a duty. I'll go because after 3 years of being invisible, I'd like to see this world that matters more to you than your wife." She brushed past him, her perfume soft vanilla and jasmine lingering in the air, like a memory he'd never dared to notice. Gary stood frozen, one hand tightening around his phone. He told himself it didn't matter, that she was just a contractual presence, necessary, but replaceable. And yet, for the first time in years, something shifted in his chest. That night, Amelia sat at her vanity, the city lights spilling across her brown skin like liquid gold. She was 30, elegant in the quiet way that didn't need approval. Before this marriage, she had been a rising financial consultant, sharp-minded, respected, free. But freedom had a price. $3 million of her parents' debt had chained her to a man who didn't believe in love, only in leverage. She looked into the mirror, into the eyes of the woman who had signed away her dreams for family loyalty. "What are you doing, Amelia?" she whispered. "Why are you still here?" because walking away from Gary Hernandez meant walking back into a world her family couldn't survive. And because deep down, she'd once believed the cold man she married might have warmth buried somewhere beneath all that steel. She laughed softly at her reflection. Fairy tales are for people who don't read contracts. Downstairs, Gary was in his office, the glow of monitors painting his sharp features in pale blue. He tried to focus on a proposal from Zurich, but his mind refused to cooperate. He kept seeing her face, those steady brown eyes that didn't lower when he spoke, that hint of pain in her voice, when she'd said, "I'll go, because I want to see your world." He'd married her out of necessity. Yes. The Nelson family had been on the brink of collapse, and his father, an unforgiving old tycoon, had arranged the union to seal a business alliance. It had been clean, strategic, emotionless. Exactly how Gary liked it. Until tonight. Until Amelia looked at him with defiance that stirred something dangerous inside him. He closed his laptop and stood pacing to the window that overlooked the Manhattan skyline. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Yellow cabs streaking down Fifth Avenue, the hum of a million stories unfolding. But in that vast ocean of light, he realized his own home was the quietest tomb. The next morning, when Amelia entered the dining room, Gary was already there, something that had never happened before. Usually he'd left before sunrise. Now he was sitting at the head of the marble table reading the Wall Street Journal. "Good morning," she said cautiously. He didn't look up. "We leave at 6 tomorrow. The flight to Miami is private. I expect punctuality." She smiled faintly. "Of course, Mr. Hernandez." He raised an eyebrow at her tone, but said nothing. As she walked past him, Gary caught a glimpse of her in the morning light, the soft waves of her dark hair, the quiet confidence in her stride. She wasn't just beautiful. She was composed, magnetic, and utterly beyond his reach. He took a sip of coffee that suddenly tasted too bitter. Later that day, Amelia stood on the balcony overlooking Central Park, the cold February wind brushing against her cheeks. Somewhere behind her, the housekeeper was preparing dinner for one, as always. 3 years, and she had never once shared a meal with her husband. She closed her eyes, inhaling the faint scent of rain and city smoke. Tomorrow she would stand beside Gary Hernandez, the billionaire who never touched her, the man whose signature had rewritten her life. Maybe the world would see them as perfect. Maybe the cameras would flash, the investors would nod, and the rumors of a loveless marriage would finally die. But deep inside, Amelia knew the truth. Perfection was just another word for pain wrapped in diamonds. That night, as she packed her single elegant dress, a strange calm settled over her. Tomorrow she would step into his glittering world, not as a shadow, but as a storm he could no longer ignore. And somewhere inside her, a whisper rose, like a promise. If he wants a wife for show, I'll give him a performance he'll never forget. She didn't know that the gala would change everything, that it would awaken a man who had buried his heart beneath empires and set fire to a woman who had forgotten how to feel. Sometimes the coldest marriages hide the hottest truths. Stay with me, because this is where everything begins. The Grand Horizon Hotel glittered like a living diamond against the Miami skyline. Cameras flashed in rhythmic bursts, limousines rolled up in glossy silence, and the ocean breeze carried a hint of salt and perfume. Inside, the chandeliers burned with golden fire, reflecting off crystal glasses and polished ambition. Amelia stepped out of the sleek black car, one gloved hand holding the clutch close to her chest. The navy gown she'd chosen wasn't new, but it fit her, like it had been waiting for this night. The fabric moved like liquid midnight as she walked. Every head turned, not because of excess or flash, but because of something subtler, the quiet authority of a woman who had nothing left to prove. Gary walked beside her, his expression unreadable, the perfect image of control. Cameras flared brighter when they saw him, Gary Hernandez, the untouchable billionaire, finally arriving with his mysterious wife. "Smile," he said softly, his voice almost mechanical. "I'm not an accessory, Gary," she replied without looking at him. His jaw flexed, but he didn't answer. Together they walked past the flashing lights and into the ballroom, where violins sang over murmuring voices and clinking glasses. The room fell into a hush, just a heartbeat when they entered. The power couple everyone whispered about, but never truly saw, had finally materialized. Amelia could feel the weight of curiosity pressing against her skin. For 3 years, society had speculated whether she even existed. Tonight, they had their answer. William Hernandez, a man in a gray tuxedo, greeted as they approached the main table. "Good to finally see you out of your empire." Gary shook his hand. "Richard Thompson," he acknowledged smoothly. "I didn't expect you in town." "Miami always calls when there's money to be made," Richard said with a grin. His gaze shifted, polite but undeniably intrigued. "And this must be your wife," Amelia, Gary said. The way her name rolled off his tongue was strange, too. Deliberate, too careful, like a word he hadn't practiced in years. Richard took Amelia's hand and brushed a formal kiss over her knuckles. "It's a pleasure," he said, his voice warm. "The pleasure's mine," Amelia replied, her smile soft but real. Gary watched the exchange, something tightening behind his composed expression. "You've been hiding her?" Richard teased lightly, turning back to Gary. "I thought the rumors of an invisible wife were just a myth." Gary's lips curved, but his eyes didn't. "Some things are better kept private." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Careful. Privacy and mystery can turn into temptation." Amelia glanced at Gary, wondering if he'd even caught the edge in Richard's words. He didn't respond, just lifted his champagne glass with the detached elegance of a man who'd mastered indifference. As the evening unfolded, Amelia found herself floating from conversation to conversation, escorted by Gary, but never with him. He introduced her to senators, CEOs, venture capitalists, and philanthropists, as though she were part of the decor, refined, necessary, but not alive. "You've done this before," said a woman in a diamond choker. "Stand there, smile, and let him do the talking." Amelia smiled faintly. "I suppose I learn quickly." Her gaze drifted to where Gary stood, in a circle of men, his smile sharp, his tone decisive. The language of power was his native tongue, but even from a distance, she could feel the walls he'd built around himself. Then a voice beside her. "You don't belong in his shadow." It was Richard again, holding 2 glasses of wine. He offered one to her. "Perhaps I like the view from here," she replied lightly. I doubt that he said, his eyes studying her with a quiet fascination. A woman who can speak fluent French and quote market data in the same breath doesn't belong behind anyone. She blinked. "You've done your research." "Observation, not research," he said with a smile. "Besides, when someone stands this still, it usually means they're preparing to move." Amelia tilted her head. "Is that supposed to be advice?" "An invitation," Richard said simply. "I'm working on a new venture energy investments in South America. I could use someone who understands global finance and language barriers." Before she could answer, Gary appeared at her side. The interruption was silent but thunderous. "She's not available," he said. Richard smiled easily. "I was speaking professionally." "Professionally or not, my wife doesn't entertain business propositions at social events." Amelia's eyes flashed. "Your wife can speak for herself, Gary." The air between them chilled a tension thick enough to taste. Guests nearby sensed it and quickly looked away. "I'd be happy to discuss your project," Amelia said to Richard, her voice calm but resolute. "Tomorrow, perhaps." Richard's eyes gleamed. "Dinner at 8. "Perfect." Gary's fingers tightened around his glass, the sound of crystal nearly cracking. The car ride back to the hotel was a study in silence. The Miami skyline stretched out in neon veins, reflections of city lights sliding over Gary's profile like restless ghosts. Finally, Amelia spoke. "You didn't have to embarrass me." "You embarrassed yourself," he replied quietly, "by talking to a man who values my mind, by letting him think he could have you." Her laugh was soft, but laced with steel. "He doesn't have me. No one does." Gary turned to her, then eyes burning, not with anger, but something more dangerous. "You think I don't notice when another man looks at you like that? I think you stopped noticing me a long time ago." The driver's eyes flickered in the rearview mirror, then wisely turned his gaze forward. Gary's voice dropped lower. "You're my wife." "On paper," she said, matching his tone. "You made that clear this morning." They stared at each other, the tension so thick it felt alive. Somewhere between resentment and something unspoken, a spark caught fire. "Tomorrow," Gary said. Finally, his voice controlled again. "Cancel the dinner." "Why?" He looked out the window, jaw tight. "Because I said so." "Then I won't." For the first time, she saw surprise in his eyes, followed by a flicker of something else. Respect. Later that night, Amelia stood alone on the hotel balcony, the ocean whispering beneath her. The moonlight brushed her bare shoulders as she stared at the horizon. She thought of her life before Gary, her freedom, her purpose, and of the last few hours, where for the first time he'd looked at her. Not as a symbol, but as a woman. Inside, Gary stood by the window, watching her through the glass door. The city's glow made her silhouette shimmer, like a secret he'd forgotten he ever owned. Something restless stirred in his chest, clawing at the cold precision he'd built his life upon. He had been certain he couldn't feel jealousy. That emotion belonged to lesser men. But tonight, watching another man touch her hand and make her smile, it had ripped through him like a wire tightening around his lungs. He hated it, and he couldn't stop thinking about it. When Amelia came back inside, he was still standing there. "You're awake," she said quietly. "I couldn't sleep. Maybe you're not used to sharing a room." He turned toward her, his face softened by the dim light. "Maybe I'm not used to feeling anything." The confession startled her. For a second, neither spoke. The air between them pulsed fragile and charged. "You don't get to feel jealous now," she said finally. "Not after 3 years of silence." Gary stepped closer, not enough to touch her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You're right," he said. "But that doesn't mean I can stop." Amelia held his gaze, her pulse quickening. "Whatever this is, Gary, don't start what you can't finish." "I don't plan to stop," he murmured. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then quietly, she walked past him, leaving only the faint scent of jasmine and the echo of something both terrifying and inevitable. Gary stood there long after she was gone, staring at the empty balcony. The city was still alive outside, but for the first time in years, so was he. The sun crept into the Miami suite with a kind of hesitant tenderness, as if afraid to touch what had happened the night before, the silence, the heat beneath it, and the words that weren't supposed to mean anything but somehow did. Amelia woke first. For a moment she forgot where she was. The pale linen sheets, the faint hum of the city below, the distant murmur of the ocean. It was too peaceful to belong to her life. Then she remembered the gala, the tension, the way Gary had looked at her, like he didn't recognize the woman standing in front of him. She sat up slowly, her head still filled with the echoes of his voice. "I don't plan to stop." Her pulse fluttered. It had been 3 years since he'd said anything that wasn't transactional. Now his words lingered like fingerprints on her skin. When she stepped out into the living room, Gary was already there, immaculate, unreadable, sipping his coffee beside the floor-to-ceiling window. His posture was perfect, his control absolute, but there was something unfamiliar in his eyes when he turned toward her. "Morning," he said quietly. "Good morning." The pause between them was heavy. She poured herself coffee, aware of his gaze following every small movement, her hand brushing back her hair, the soft sound of the spoon against the cup. Finally, he spoke again. "I canceled your dinner with Richard." Her hand froze. "You what?" "I sent a message to his assistant this morning." She turned, voice sharp. "You had no right." "I had every right." He countered, his tone calm, but edged. "He crossed a line last night." Amelia set down her cup carefully. "You mean you crossed one, Gary?" "You don't get to choose who I talk to. I don't need to choose. I just need to protect what's mine." "Yours," she repeated, incredulous. "Is that what I am?" "An investment. A property." His jaw tightened. "You're my wife," she laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. That word means something to people who actually share a life, not a contract. For the first time, something flickered behind his calm, hurt, raw, and unguarded. "You think this doesn't affect me. I think you don't even know what this is." Her words hit harder than she intended. Gary turned away, staring at the ocean, the sunlight cutting a line across his face. "You're right," he said finally. "I don't know how to do this." Amelia crossed her arms. "Then why start now?" He didn't answer. They spent the flight back to New York in silence. The private jet hummed softly, clouds rolling by, like sheets of pale smoke. Amelia pretended to read a book. Gary pretended not to look at her. Every few minutes she'd catch his reflection in the window, his jaw set, his eyes distant, but restless. He wasn't the man she'd married 3 years ago. That man had been cold in the way marble was cold, beautiful, unreachable, designed to last. This one looked uncertain. When they landed, it was raining. Manhattan greeted them with the gray, familiar heaviness of winter. Gary followed her into the waiting car. "I'll drop you at home," he said. "I have a meeting downtown." "Of course," she replied, her voice polite, practiced. But when the car pulled up to the penthouse and she reached for the door handle, his hand caught her wrist. "Amelia." She turned, startled. He was leaning closer, his eyes searching hers, rain streaking across the tinted glass. "Don't walk away angry," he said. "I'm not angry," she whispered. "I'm exhausted." He hesitated, then let her go. "I'll be home tonight." She wanted to ask why. He hadn't come home in months. But instead she simply nodded and stepped into the rain. That evening she didn't expect him to keep his word. But at 8:15 she heard the door click open. Gary entered, coat, damp tie, loosened hair, slightly disheveled, a sight she'd never seen before. He looked almost human in that imperfection. "I thought you'd be at the office," she said. "I was," he admitted, setting his phone down. "But I couldn't concentrate." "On what?" "On anything," he said quietly. He crossed the room and stopped a few feet from her. The air between them seemed to shrink. "Why did you marry me, Amelia?" he asked suddenly. She blinked. "You know why. I want to hear you say it." Her throat tightened. "Because my family needed saving." His expression darkened. "And you needed to be owned by someone rich enough to fix everything." Her voice trembled, but she stood her ground. "No, I needed to survive." He exhaled slowly, regret flashing in his eyes. I never wanted to be your captor. Then you shouldn't have locked the door, she replied. Silence. Rain beat softly against the windows. I didn't realize how cold I'd made this place, he said finally. How cold I'd made you feel. She swallowed hard. You didn't make me cold, Gary. You made me invisible. Something inside him broke at that. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then look at me now. Tell me I'm still invisible. Her breath caught. Don't do this. I need to understand, he said, eyes searching hers like a man looking for a map. I've built entire empires out of logic, but when it comes to you, nothing makes sense. Amelia tried to speak, but no words came. He reached out slowly, carefully, and brushed his fingertips against her hand. It wasn't a claim. It was a question. She didn't pull away. Later, when the rain eased and the city fell quiet, they sat across from each other at the kitchen island, 2 untouched cups of tea between them. Gary broke the silence. Richard called. She looked up sharply. You told me you canceled. He wanted to apologize. Gary interrupted, said he didn't mean to cause trouble. And what did you tell him? That I don't share what I can't replace. Her eyes narrowed. That's not an apology. That's arrogance. He smiled faintly. You misunderstand. I meant I can't replace you. Amelia stared at him, caught off guard by the honesty in his tone. There was no performance in it, no corporate precision, just truth stripped bare. For the first time since their wedding, she couldn't find the line between what was real and what was pretense. Don't say things you don't mean. Gary, she said softly. I don't say things I don't mean, he replied. That's the problem. Her heartbeat stumbled. Then mean this carefully. I already do. He leaned forward slightly, and for a fleeting moment, she thought he might kiss her. The thought terrified her, and she didn't know why. Good night, Gary, she whispered, standing abruptly. He didn't stop her this time, but as she disappeared down the hallway, he realized that for the first time in his life, he wanted something he couldn't buy, build, or negotiate. He wanted her. That night, Amelia lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the way he'd looked at her, not with dominance, but with something that felt dangerously close to vulnerability. The Gary she knew had always been a fortress, but tonight, a door had opened. She should have been afraid. Instead, she felt the faintest tremor of hope, and that frightened her more than anything. Because hope, she'd learned, was the most expensive thing a woman could own. The morning began with the smell of rain. New York was gray again, skyscrapers half swallowed by mist, the kind of morning that made the world feel too quiet. Amelia stood by the window, one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. She hadn't slept much, not after last night, not after the look in Gary's eyes. The echo of his words haunted her still. I can't replace you. There was sincerity in it, too much sincerity for the man who once measured every sentence as if it were a line item on a balance sheet. But sincerity, she reminded herself, didn't erase 3 years of silence. It didn't rewrite what had already been done. Behind her, the sound of footsteps broke the stillness. You're up early, Gary said, voice low, still rough from sleep. So are you. He stopped beside her, looking out at the rain with her. I had a dream, he said quietly. She turned slightly. About what? About the night we met. Her breath hitched. You mean the night we were introduced? No, he said, his eyes fixed on the skyline. The night before that. You probably don't remember. She frowned. I don't. Gary hesitated, then said, You were at the Nelson fundraiser. I was there to talk business with your father. You stood by the piano in a red dress, arguing with one of the donors about education reform. Amelia blinked. That was you. I didn't even know you were there. I watched you for 10 minutes, he said softly. I remember thinking you were alive. The kind of alive that made people want to be near you. The confession caught her off guard, slicing through her guarded calm. And then what? You decided to buy that life instead of earn it. Gary flinched. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, she said. You just didn't want the kind that came with risk. His jaw tightened. And you did? She met his gaze steady and unyielding. I married a man I didn't love, didn't even know to save the people I cared about. You think I'm afraid of risk? Silence filled the room thick and alive. Gary looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. Your father came to me first, Amelia. It wasn't my idea. Her fingers went cold around the coffee cup. What, he needed help? Gary continued quietly. His company was drowning. He offered the merger and the marriage as a guarantee. My father thought it was a smart deal. Her world tilted, the walls seeming to close in. You knew, she said slowly. You knew from the beginning that I was the price. I didn't want it that way, but you didn't stop it either. Gary took a step closer. I thought I was saving both our families. She laughed, bitter quiet. You weren't saving anyone, Gary. You were sealing my sentence. He tried to reach for her, but she stepped back. Don't, Amelia. Her voice cracked, but her stare was unshaken. You could have told me. You could have warned me. You let me walk into that marriage believing it was just business politics, not a transaction, written over my name. He swallowed hard. I told myself it didn't matter how we started, as long as I took care of you. Care, she repeated, laughing through her tears. You didn't speak to me for months. You gave me everything but yourself. Gary's face was pale now, guilt raw in his voice. You're right. I destroyed something before I even understood what it could be. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The rain tapped gently against the glass, the city's pulse distant and indifferent. Finally, Amelia whispered, Do you even know who I was? Before all this? Gary's voice was low. I'm trying to. Then listen, she said. I was a woman who believed in earning her place, not being traded for it. I worked hard for everything I had. When my father told me about the arrangement, I thought God help me. I thought it was temporary, that I could keep my dignity somehow. But when you looked at me on our wedding day, I realized it wasn't a deal anymore. It was a prison. Gary closed his eyes, the pain in her words cutting deep. If I could go back. You can't, she interrupted softly. None of us can. That evening, the tension between them lingered like smoke. Gary worked late in his office downstairs, pretending to read reports, while his mind circled back to her voice, her disappointment, her defiance. Every word she said had weight. He could negotiate billion-dollar contracts without breaking a sweat, but with her, he was a man drowning in sentences he didn't know how to answer. He looked at his phone. The screen showed a photo from the gala, a rare press image of them standing side by side. He zoomed in. Her smile looked effortless, but he knew now how much strength it took for her to fake it. He pressed the power button and set the phone aside. He couldn't work. He couldn't think. Upstairs, Amelia sat in the reading room, a single lamp, casting a soft circle of light. The house was too quiet, like it was holding its breath. She heard footsteps, and then Gary appeared in the doorway. He hesitated before speaking. You haven't eaten. I'm not hungry. Neither am I. She gave him a long look. Then what are you doing here? Trying, he said simply. To do what? to be the man you thought you married." She let out a slow exhale. "I never thought you were anything but what you showed me, Gary. Then maybe I want to show you something else." Her eyes softened slightly, but she said nothing. He came closer, stopping just short of the lamplight. "I can't change how this started, but I can decide how it ends." "Big words," she murmured. "You always had a talent for those. I don't want words this time." His tone was quiet, stripped of armor. "I want you to see that I mean it." "And how do you plan to do that?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm going to find out." For a moment something shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the faintest tremor of possibility. Amelia looked at him for a long time. "Then start by telling me something true. Not business, not appearances. You." Gary hesitated, then said, "I was 12 when I learned that love was weakness. My father told me that feelings cost men their empires, so I built mine out of stone instead." Her voice softened. "And now I'm realizing stone can't hold warmth." She looked down at her hands. "That's the first honest thing you've said to me in 3 years." "I know." The silence that followed wasn't empty this time. It was fragile, trembling with something alive. Finally, she stood. "Good night, Gary." He stepped aside, watching as she disappeared down the hallway, her shadow flickering in the golden light. When the door closed behind her, Gary sat down on the edge of the sofa, hands buried in his hair. For the first time, the empire outside those walls felt meaningless. He'd spent his life mastering control of markets, of people, of everything that could be calculated. But this Amelia, her pain, her truth, wasn't something he could fix with power. And as he listened to the rain fade into silence, one thought haunted him above all. He had finally begun to understand what love was, just as he realized how easily he'd destroyed it. It had been raining for 2 days straight in New York, the kind of relentless drizzle that made the whole city feel suspended between wakefulness and dream. The penthouse felt heavier than usual. Too big, too quiet, too full of unsaid things. Amelia moved through it like someone learning how to breathe again. The argument had stripped something bare between them. It hadn't fixed anything, but it had cracked open the walls. And now, through those cracks, she could feel the strange warmth of something that scared her more than his anger ever had his sincerity. She found him that morning in the kitchen, shirt sleeves rolled up, fumbling with a coffee machine he clearly didn't know how to use. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You're going to break it." Gary looked up startled, then smirked faintly. "I was trying to make you breakfast. That's alarming." He chuckled under his breath, and for a moment the sound didn't belong to the man who had built an empire out of silence. "I can handle it," he said. "Just give me a second." "Gary," she said softly, walking toward him, "you don't have to do this." "I know," he said, meeting her eyes. "That's why I want to." Something about the way he said it, quiet, uncalculated, made her pulse stutter. He handed her a cup. The coffee was too strong bitter, but she drank it anyway. "Better than I expected," she said. "Don't lie to me, Amelia." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe you should stop making it so easy." He looked at her for a long time, and she saw something new there. Not dominance, not distance, but a kind of hesitant wonder. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I don't deserve this moment," he said simply. "Or you." She didn't answer, but something inside her softened despite herself. Later that day, Gary asked her to come to his office. It wasn't unusual. His office occupied half the floor, a minimalist expanse of glass and steel. But there was something different about the way he asked. "I want to show you something," he said. When she stepped inside, he was standing by the window, a folder in his hand. "I had my legal team Dissolve the Nelson-Hernandez merger, he said quietly. She froze. What? The contract that tied our families? It's gone. Her heart began to race. Why would you do that? Because I'm tired of knowing your life was signed over to me like an asset, he said. You deserve to breathe without owing anyone for it. Amelia stared at him. Do you even understand what that means? You're giving up millions. I'm giving up guilt, he said, and that's worth more. Her throat tightened. You don't need to prove anything, Gary. I do, he said, to myself, to you. I don't want to own what I love. I just want to love it right. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The word love slipped into the air so quietly, she almost didn't hear it. He came closer slowly, as if afraid she'd vanish if he moved too fast. When I said I couldn't replace you, he murmured, it wasn't a line. I meant it. You're the only thing in my life that feels real. Amelia's heart thudded painfully. Gary, I don't expect forgiveness, he interrupted. I just need you to know I see you now. Not as a contract, not as a name. Just you. Tears burned at the back of her eyes, but she blinked them away. It's too late to undo what's been done. He nodded. Then let me do something new. Over the next few weeks, the rhythm of their life shifted, not dramatically, but in small, almost invisible ways. Gary started eating dinner at home. Sometimes he cooked terribly. Sometimes they ordered takeout and talked about everything but the past books, art, even the absurd price of real estate. They never labeled whatever was happening between them. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it wasn't hatred anymore either. It was something fragile, an understanding maybe, a truce built from the rubble. One evening she found him asleep on the sofa, still in his shirt and tie, a pen in his hand, papers scattered around. His phone buzzed with messages he hadn't answered. For a long time she just stood there watching him. He looked younger when he slept, less haunted. She picked up a fallen page. It was a proposal for a foundation in her name, a nonprofit focused on education for underprivileged youth. Her chest tightened. She didn't know whether to cry or to laugh. When he woke, she was sitting beside him, the page in her hand. You were going to tell me about this, she asked quietly. I was waiting for the right time. You never wait, she said. He smiled faintly. You make me want to. She studied the paper. Gary, this isn't necessary. I know, he said. But I wanted to give back something real, something that isn't about me. She shook her head, overwhelmed. You don't have to rebuild the world to fix what's broken between us. I'm not trying to fix it, he said. I'm trying to understand it. Their eyes met, and she saw it there, the man beneath the armor, the one she hadn't believed existed. Later that night, they stood by the balcony overlooking the city. The air smelled like rain again. You really destroyed the contract, she asked. Yes, he said. My lawyers think I've lost my mind. Maybe you have. Maybe it's the first sane thing I've ever done. She turned to him. You're still trying to prove you've changed. He shook his head. No, I'm trying to learn how to stay. The words sank deep. They didn't need explanation. After a moment, she said softly, You know what scares me most, Gary? What? That. I almost believe you. He smiled faintly. Almost. Don't push it. The corner of his mouth curved. I'll take almost. But the peace didn't last. One afternoon, while sorting documents in his study, Amelia found a sealed envelope with her name on it. It wasn't new, dated nearly 2 years ago. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter from Gary's father. Formal and cold, as per our agreement, your compliance ensures the success of the merger. The Hernandez family expects discretion. Should you wish to terminate your obligations prematurely, financial penalties will apply. Her stomach twisted. The words bled into her vision. 2 years ago. He had known. All this time. She barely heard the elevator doors when Gary came in. Amelia, he called. She turned to face him, the letter trembling in her hand. You never told me this existed. His face drained of color. Where did you find that? In your desk, she said, voice shaking. You kept it. Amelia. That's not what she demanded, not proof that everything I thought was true. He took a step closer. That letter was my father's doing. I didn't write it. But you didn't burn it either, she said bitterly. You kept it like a reminder of what I owed you. That's not why. Then why, Gary? Her voice cracked. Why hold on to something that should have disgusted you? He exhaled hard, running a hand through his hair. Because it did disgust me. I kept it to remind myself of who I never wanted to be again. Her heart pounded painfully. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But all she could see was the weight of that paper, the deal that had stolen her name, her freedom, her choice. She turned toward the door. I can't do this. Amelia, don't, she whispered. I thought I could forgive you, but maybe I was just lying to myself. Gary's hand fell uselessly to his side as the elevator doors closed between them. The letter slipped from his fingers to the floor, its ink blurring under the first drop of rain that had followed her out. The city outside roared with life. But inside the penthouse, Gary stood in silence, his reflection fractured across the tall glass windows. The letter lay on the floor, the ink still glistening under the soft light, the last proof of everything he had done wrong. He didn't pick it up. He couldn't. He just stared at it, as though looking too closely might make the truth rewrite itself. But it didn't. It never did. Amelia was gone. Again. And this time he wasn't sure if she would come back. She took nothing with her. No bags, no jewelry, not even the engagement ring that had once meant obligation more than love. The apartment she went to was small, quiet, the kind of place where nobody cared who you were. She sat by the window for hours, watching the world blur by the streets, reflecting in puddles like broken mirrors. She thought she had run out of tears after the first year of her marriage. She'd been wrong. They came back easily now, as if waiting for permission. When the knock came at the door that night, her heart leapt despite herself. But it wasn't Gary. It was Richard. He stood there, rain dripping from his coat eyes, shadowed but warm. You shouldn't be alone. Amelia hesitated, then stepped aside. I didn't ask you to come. I know, he said gently. That's why I'm here. She turned away, crossing her arms. I don't need rescuing. Richard smiled faintly. I didn't come to rescue you. I came to listen. That word listen felt heavier than it should have. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of rain on glass. Finally, she said, You ever feel like your life doesn't belong to you anymore? Every day, Richard answered softly. But the trick is learning when to take it back. She looked at him, then really looked, and saw not pity, but understanding. Back in Manhattan, Gary didn't go to the office. He couldn't face it, the board, the meetings, the mechanical rhythm of money and control. He spent his days pacing through the echo of her absence. Every room carried her fingerprint, the book left half-read, the scent of her perfume clinging to the air, a coffee mug still sitting by the sink. He thought he knew loneliness. He'd worn it like armor his whole life. But this emptiness was something else. It wasn't silence. It was the memory of her voice, the ghost of her laughter. At night, he sat at the piano in the corner of the living room. She'd played it once months ago, when he'd returned home early from work and found her lost in the melody. He hadn't said a word then. Now he wished he had. His fingers hovered over the keys, then pressed down. The sound that filled the room was raw, uneven, like someone learning to feel again. 3 days passed before he saw her again. It was pure coincidence, or maybe something crueler. He had gone to the charity event she was supposed to attend with him. Weeks ago, an obligation he couldn't cancel without raising questions. And there she was. Amelia in a simple black dress, her hair swept up her face, calm but unreadable. Richard stood beside her, his hand light on her arm as he led her through the crowd. For a moment, Gary couldn't breathe. The sight of her hit like a punch. When their eyes met across the room, everything else fell away. He moved toward her every step, careful, deliberate. "Amelia," he said, when he reached her. His voice was softer than he intended. "Gary," she replied evenly. Richard excused himself politely, sensing the storm between them. Gary's throat felt tight. "You look—" "Don't," she interrupted. "Please don't say something polite. It'll ruin it." He exhaled. "I didn't come here to play polite." "Then what did you come for?" "To apologize," he said. "You already did," she replied. "And you were good at it. Almost convincing. This isn't another performance." Her eyes softened, just barely. "You're still learning the difference between regret and love." "I know what I feel," he said quietly. "And I know what I lost." Amelia looked away, the light catching the edge of her profile. "You didn't lose me, Gary. You let me go long before I walked out." The words hit like truth always did, without mercy. Later, after the gala ended, she found him outside, standing by the fountain, the city lights flickering against the water. "You shouldn't have come," she said, approaching him. "I had to." "Why?" "Because every day without you feels like punishment." She folded her arms. "You don't get to turn pain into poetry now." He gave a faint, broken smile. "I'm not trying to. I'm just telling you what it feels like." She looked at him for a long time. "You know what it feels like for me, Gary. It feels like I spent years learning how to disappear, and the moment I finally did, you noticed." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Then let me notice you now." She shook her head, tears glinting in her eyes. "It's not that simple. I'm not asking for simple," he said. "I'm asking for one chance to be better. You can't rewrite the past." "Then let me write the next chapter differently." For a moment, she almost smiled. "You sound like one of your board presentations." He laughed softly. "Maybe, but for once, the stakes are real." She took a slow breath, then said, "Gary, you hurt me. You broke things I didn't even know could break. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to mend them," he said. "You can't fix me." "I'm not trying to fix you," he said quietly. "I'm trying to deserve you." They stood there under the halo of city light, the air thick with everything unspoken. Then, from behind, Richard's voice broke the silence. "Amelia, the car's waiting." Gary's chest tightened. She turned to him one last time. "Don't follow me tonight." He didn't. He just watched as she walked away, her figure fading into the blur of headlights and rain. When she was gone, he closed his eyes, letting the cold wind cut through his composure. That night, Amelia lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling. Every word he'd said replayed in her mind. The anger she'd tried to hold on to was slipping, replaced by something far more dangerous, the memory of how it felt to be seen. She hated that part of her, still wanted to believe him, but wanting and trusting were not the same. In the penthouse, Gary sat by the window, a glass of untouched whiskey on the table beside him. He'd sent the letter to his father earlier that evening. Effective immediately, I withdraw from the board. Do what you will with the company. It was madness, maybe, but so was love. He wasn't sure what would happen next. He just knew one thing for the first time in years. He didn't care about legacy or power or control. He cared about her. He looked out at the sleeping city, the storm clouds drifting apart. Somewhere out there, Amelia was awake too. And though distance separated them, a single truth tied them still. Some things once broken can't go back to what they were. But sometimes, if you're lucky, they come back as something truer, something that hurts less and means more. Morning crept into the city like a secret. The sun bled through layers of fog, soft and unsure, brushing gold across the skyline. Amelia stood in front of the mirror of her small apartment, tying her hair back with quiet precision. She hadn't heard from Gary in a week. Not a text, not a call. And yet his silence haunted her more than his words ever had. She told herself that this was what she wanted: peace, independence, distance. But peace didn't explain why her chest tightened every time her phone lit up. Distance didn't explain why she still caught herself thinking about the way he said her name softly, like he was afraid it would break. The knock on her door startled her. For one wild second, she thought hoped it was him. It wasn't. It was her mother. "Amelia," she said gently, stepping inside. "You look tired." Amelia forced a smile. "You always say that." "Because it's always true," her mother replied, studying her face. "I saw the news." Amelia froze. What news? Her mother handed her a folded newspaper. There, in clean black print, was the headline, "Gary Hernandez steps down from his empire." Amelia's hands trembled slightly. What? Her mother nodded. He resigned, sold his shares, gave up control of everything. People are saying he's lost his mind. The paper slipped from Amelia's fingers. He wouldn't. She stopped herself. Wouldn't what? Wouldn't destroy the empire he'd built. Wouldn't throw away his legacy for her. Her mother's eyes softened. Maybe he finally realized something money couldn't buy. Amelia looked away. Or maybe he's just trying to prove something. "Sweetheart," her mother said softly, touching her arm, "sometimes proving love means losing everything that's not worth keeping." Amelia swallowed hard. "You think I should go to him? I think you should decide whether the part of you that still loves him can forgive the part that can't forget." Amelia said nothing, but that night she found herself standing by the window, staring out at the glittering city lights. His city, their city, and wondered if forgiveness always had to come after understanding, or if sometimes it simply came from love that refused to die. Across town, Gary sat alone in his office for the last time. The walls were bare now. The paintings and awards had already been packed away. All that remained was a single photo of him and Amelia from a long-forgotten gala, her smile radiant, his expression guarded. He stared at it for a long time, before finally slipping it into his pocket. When his father entered, Gary didn't look up. "So it's true," Robert Hernandez said flatly. "You're walking away." "Yes," Gary replied. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," Gary said. "But for the first time, it's my mistake." His father's voice hardened. "You were born to lead this company." "I was born into your expectations," Gary said quietly. "But I don't want to live by them anymore." Robert studied his son's disappointment and something almost like fear flickering in his eyes. All this. For a woman, Gary finally looked up. For the woman. The only one who ever made me question who I am." His father scoffed. "You're throwing away a dynasty." "No," Gary said calmly. "I'm building something human." He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked past his father without another word. It was late when Amelia finally decided to go. She didn't call ahead. She didn't even know what she planned to say. All she knew was that something in her heart wouldn't rest until she saw him again. When she reached the penthouse, the doorman hesitated before letting her in. "He's still there, ma'am," he said quietly. But the movers came earlier. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened, she found the place half-empty boxes stacked near the walls, furniture covered in white sheets. Gary was standing by the window, his back to her, looking out over the city. He didn't turn when she entered. "Leaving again," she said softly. He froze. Slowly, he turned around. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world stopped moving. Amelia. Her name left his lips like a prayer. "You're really giving it all up," she said, scanning the room. "The company, the penthouse, everything." He nodded. "It never really belonged to me anyway. I just didn't realize it until I almost lost what did." She stepped closer. "You didn't have to destroy your life to prove you loved me." "I didn't do it to prove anything," he said. "I did it because I couldn't keep living a life that cost me you." Something in her chest twisted painfully. "And what if I can't come back? Then at least I'll know I became the kind of man who deserved the chance," he said quietly. She stared at him, her voice trembling. "You're infuriating." He smiled faintly. "So you've told me." The silence between them stretched, filled with all the words they hadn't said. Finally she whispered, "I read the letter." He exhaled. "I know. You kept it to remind yourself who you didn't want to be." "Yes. Then maybe I should have done the same," she said, her voice softening, "to remember who I was before I stopped believing in us." Gary stepped forward close enough that she could feel the warmth of his breath. "And who are you now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But maybe I want to find out again." He lifted his hand, then stopped halfway. "Can I?" She nodded. His fingers brushed her cheek, tentative, reverent. For the first time in a long time, she didn't pull away. They talked for hours, not about the past, but about everything that came after. He told her about stepping down, about the foundation he wanted to build, in her name. She told him about the apartment, about how it felt to finally breathe, without fear. "Do you hate me?" he asked quietly. She smiled sadly. "If I did, it would mean I stopped caring, and I haven't." He looked at her, then eyes full of something unguarded, something raw. "What do you want, Amelia?" She hesitated. "Time." He nodded. "Then take it. I'll wait." "Don't," she whispered. "Don't wait for me like I'm the answer to your redemption." "You're not," he said. "You're the reason I started looking for one." Her throat tightened. "You make it sound so easy." "It isn't," he said. "It's the hardest thing I've ever done." The rain began again outside, soft and steady against the glass. Amelia turned toward the window, watching the streaks blur the lights below. "Maybe we both needed to break before we could start over." Gary's voice was low. "Then tell me this, if we start again, do we begin from the past or from nothing?" She looked back at him. "From honesty. Everything else can wait." He nodded, his expression unreadable, then whispered, "Then that's enough." When she finally left that night, the air felt lighter somehow. Gary walked her to the door, stopping just before she stepped into the hall. "Amelia," he said. She turned. "Yes. Do you think forgiveness and love can live in the same place?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "Maybe not at first, but if the love is real, eventually one becomes the other. He watched her leave, the sound of her footsteps fading down the corridor. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel empty watching her go. Because this time, it didn't feel like the end. It felt like the fragile, trembling beginning of something that might just survive. Autumn arrived quietly. The first chill brushed through the trees of Central Park, scattering gold and rust across the pavement. Weeks had passed since Amelia left the penthouse that night. The city had moved on, the markets, the people, the headlines. But inside both of them, time had slowed to a heartbeat, suspended between what was lost and what might still be found. Amelia's days were simple now. Coffee from the same corner shop, morning walks past the same bookstore. Her life had shrunk into calm, deliberate rhythms, and yet something in her felt too awake, as though every sound in the city was calling her name. Sometimes she'd catch a glimpse of his face on a magazine someone was reading on the subway, the headline still speculating about why a man like Gary Hernandez would give up a billion-dollar empire for nothing. They never understood that it wasn't for nothing. It was for something no balance sheet could calculate. And yet she didn't call him. She didn't go back. Because love wasn't about returning out of loneliness. It was about knowing when you were ready to truly stay. Gary had left New York. The papers said he was taking time off, but he hadn't told anyone where. Only his assistant knew, a quiet lakeside house upstate, far from the sound of traffic or the pulse of business. He woke early every morning to stillness, the kind that felt both like peace and punishment. He'd traded boardrooms for silence, profit margins for reflection. And though he told himself it was healing, it still felt like exile. Every sunrise reminded him of what he'd built, and every sunset of what he'd lost. One evening, as he sat by the dock with a cup of untouched whiskey, his phone buzzed. It wasn't her. It never was. But it was a photo message from one of the foundation staff members. It showed a new learning center under construction, the sign already mounted, the Nelson Project for Youth Empowerment. Beneath it, a caption, approved by Amelia Nelson. Gary's breath caught. He hadn't asked her to accept the project, and yet she had. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something close, a bridge between two hearts, still separated by regret, but slowly remembering how to reach across it. Days turned into weeks, and then winter arrived, sharp and unforgiving. Snow fell across the city in heavy sheets, turning everything white and unfamiliar. Amelia wrapped her scarf tighter as she stepped outside the cold, biting her cheeks. She'd spent the afternoon reviewing the foundation's progress, visiting the children's library they'd opened downtown. Watching the kids laugh, run, and dream reminded her of something Gary once said: "I built empires because I didn't know how to build people." Maybe she thought this was what rebuilding looked like, not starting over with him, but with herself. Until she saw him again. It happened unexpectedly. She was crossing the lobby of a hotel downtown, rushing to meet one of the donors, when she heard a voice behind her, deep, steady, unmistakable. Amelia. Her heart stopped. She turned. Gary stood there, snow melting into his coat, his expression quiet but unreadable. He looked different, leaner, softer somehow, as if the world had finally stripped away everything that wasn't real. She swallowed. "You found me." "I wasn't looking," he said. "I just walked in and there you were." "That sounds like you," she murmured, always pretending fate is coincidence. He smiled faintly. "If I told you I've imagined this moment 100 times, would that make it any less real?" She didn't answer. He took a careful step closer. "I heard about the foundation. You're doing something beautiful." "You started it," she said. "No," he corrected softly. "You gave it purpose." She looked at him for a long moment. You look tired. I am, he said. But for once, it's a good kind of tired. Something fragile flickered in her chest. She wanted to tell him to go, to let the past rest. But seeing him there, imperfect, stripped of the arrogance that once defined him, she realized something. She wasn't angry anymore. Just afraid of believing again. Why are you here, Gary? She asked quietly. Because I needed to see if time had changed you as much as it's changed me. And he exhaled slowly. It hasn't. You still look like the only person I ever wanted to be honest with. Her voice softened. And what if I told you I stopped believing in promises? Then don't. He said, just believe in presence. She looked down, then back up. Presence fades too, not when it finally means something. They sat in the hotel cafe for an hour, though neither drank the coffee between them. The conversation moved in slow circles, not about love or forgiveness, but about who they'd become. He told her about the lake house, the silence, the mornings that made him realize he'd never actually been alive until he lost everything. She told him about the foundation, about finding meaning again through the laughter of children who didn't know what it meant to be broken. Somewhere in the middle of it, the air shifted. He reached across the table, fingers brushing hers, tentative, reverent. She didn't pull away this time. I'm not asking for us to go back, he said quietly. I'm asking for the chance to move forward, even if it's just one step at a time. Gary, she began, but the words caught in her throat. He smiled faintly. You don't have to say yes. I'll walk away if you want me to. She stared at him, the man who once believed control was power, now offering her freedom instead. No, she whispered. Don't walk away. He froze, disbelief flickering across his face. I don't know what this is yet, she continued softly, but I'm not ready to lose it again before I understand it. The days that followed didn't feel like a fairy tale. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic kisses under the snow. There was only patience, quiet, persistent, fragile. Gary stayed in the city, not in the penthouse, but in a small apartment near the foundation office. They started meeting for lunch, for long walks in the park. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't, and sometimes silence said more than words ever could. One evening, as they stood on the Brooklyn Bridge, wind sweeping through their coats, Amelia turned to him and said, I used to think forgiveness was something I had to give you. Now I realize it was something I had to give myself. Gary looked at her, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. And did you? Almost, she said, but I'm getting there. He nodded slowly. Then I'll meet you there. Later that night, she walked him to his building. At the door, he paused. Amelia, he said softly, do you ever think about what we could have been if we hadn't started the way we did? She smiled gently. No, because then we wouldn't be who we are now. He nodded, understanding. Maybe love isn't about how it starts. No, she said. It's about who's still standing when everything else falls apart. He hesitated, then leaned forward, brushing a kiss against her forehead, light trembling true. It wasn't the desperate kind of love that burned everything down. It was quieter, steadier, the kind that grows from ashes. When she whispered, "Good night, Gary," he smiled, and for once it felt like a promise neither of them had to say out loud. Because this time, it wasn't built on contracts or power or redemption. It was built on something smaller, simpler, and infinitely stronger. Two hearts finally learning how to stay. Spring returned like a confession. The city unfurled in soft greens and trembling light, as though everything it had buried under snow was finally brave enough to bloom again. Amelia stood in the courtyard of the new foundation building, the air filled with laughter. The kind of laughter that didn't echo from walls of wealth, but from the open air of possibility. Children ran past her holding paintbrushes, their sneakers splattered with color. She smiled. She thought this was what healing looked like, not loud or grand, but quiet and persistent. A seed breaking open in the dark. Behind her, a voice said softly, "They painted the wall without asking for permission." She turned. Gary stood there, his sleeves rolled up, watching the children with a half smile. "And yet it's perfect," she said. "It is," he admitted. "Better than any blueprint I could have drawn." They stood side by side, watching a little girl swirl yellow into blue until it became a stubborn, uneven green. "She said she wanted to paint what hope feels like," Amelia murmured. Gary glanced at her. "And what does it feel like?" Amelia's lips curved gently. "Messy, unpredictable, sometimes too bright, but always worth it." His eyes softened. "That sounds a lot like us." She laughed quietly. "Maybe it does." Later that afternoon, when the crowd had left, they walked together along the East River, the wind teasing her hair, the sunlight catching the edge of his smile. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Everything between them now existed in small gestures. The way his hand brushed hers when they crossed the street. The way she lingered beside him, just long enough for the world to feel less heavy. They reached a small park bench overlooking the water. Gary sat down first, then looked up at her. "Sit with me." She hesitated, teasing. "You sound sure I'll say yes." "I'm learning to ask without assuming," he said, his tone sincere, but light. Amelia sat beside him, folding her hands in her lap. For a long time, neither spoke. The sun sank lower, streaking gold across the skyline. Finally, he said, "When I stepped down from the company, I thought I was losing everything. But it turns out I was just clearing space." "For what?" "For the kind of life that has room for you." She looked at him then, and the moment was too quiet, too fragile. "Gary," she said softly, "you don't need to keep proving you've changed." "I'm not trying to," he said. "I'm just trying to keep showing up." Her throat tightened. "You really think love can survive everything we've been through?" He smiled faintly. "I don't think love survives because it's easy, Amelia. I think it survives because both people finally decide to stop running from it." She turned her gaze back to the water. The sunlight flickered across its surface, bright and broken. "You know, for the longest time, I didn't believe in second chances. And now," she smiled almost shyly, "now I think the universe keeps handing them to us until we're finally ready to hold them right." As the evening deepened, they walked back toward the city. The streets glowed with the kind of warmth that comes just before dusk, when everything looks touched by memory. They passed a florist's stand overflowing with tulips and forget-me-nots. Gary stopped and picked up a single white tulip. "For you," he said, handing it to her. She raised an eyebrow. "Do you even know what it means?" He nodded. "Forgiveness." Her smile faltered, softening into something deeper. "That's poetic." He looked at her, eyes steady. "No. That's us." She took the flower fingers, brushing his. "Then maybe this time, we'll keep it alive." That night, back at her apartment, Amelia found herself unable to sleep. She stepped out onto the small balcony, the city humming below her, alive, chaotic, indifferent. Yet somewhere in that noise, she felt peace. The door opened behind her. Gary stepped out barefoot, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You couldn't sleep either," she shook her head. "Too much light, too much noise." He leaned against the railing beside her. You used to hate the noise. I still do, she admitted. But it doesn't bother me when you're here. For a long moment, they just stood there, the air between them thick with everything they'd said and everything they hadn't needed to. Finally, Gary turned to her. You know, I used to think love was about control, about holding on tight enough that it couldn't leave. And now she asked softly. Now I know it's about holding gently enough that it wants to stay. Amelia's eyes glistened. You've changed, Gary. He smiled. No, I think I finally became who I should have been when I met you. She reached out, tracing her thumb across his jaw. It's strange, isn't it? How something can break you and still be the only thing that makes you whole. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. That's because real love doesn't fix you. It teaches you how to live with the cracks. The words settled between them like a vow neither of them had to speak aloud. They didn't rush what came next. They didn't call it starting over or forgiveness. They simply let it be. A shared morning coffee, a walk that turned into laughter, the warmth of his hand brushing hers and staying there this time. For once, there were no conditions, no contracts, no promises of forever, only the quiet, steady choosing of each other, one day at a time. Months later, at the grand opening of the foundation's main center, the mayor gave a speech about perseverance and hope. Cameras flashed, people applauded, and yet Amelia barely heard any of it. She stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Gary speak to a group of children kneeling to their height, as if trying to see the world from where they stood. When his eyes found hers across the courtyard, he smiled, not the polished smile of the man he used to be, but something real, unguarded. She smiled back, and in that moment, she realized something. They hadn't found their way back to what they once were. They'd built something new, something stronger because it had been broken first. That night, when the celebration ended and the city went quiet again, they stood beneath the soft glow of the building's lights. Gary whispered, "We did it." She looked up at him. "No, Gary, you did it." He shook his head. "No, we did it. Because even when you walked away, you still believed there was something worth saving." Amelia smiled, resting her head against his chest. Maybe that's what love really is, believing even when you shouldn't. He held her tighter, and choosing even when it hurts. The night stretched around them, tender and infinite. The city kept breathing, and somewhere in that rhythm, their hearts found the same pace again. And for the first time, maybe the only time, neither of them needed to say forever. Because some loves don't need to be promised. They only need to be lived. If you've ever loved someone through the storm, if you've ever chosen to stay when it would have been easier to walk away, you already know love doesn't end. It transforms. And sometimes, just sometimes, it finds its way home.